Any apologies? We have received apologies from Ian, Gary, Michaela and others. No. Draft minutes, pages 5 to 10. Members contempt their accurate records. Agreed. My members at the meeting last week, committee considered SL1 rates, ATMs, designation of rural areas, order. Mr Wells queried the ATM situation in Rathryland. Was told that the wards were listed against Newry Morning Down Council. I refer members to page 12 of members' packs, which provides some clarification of the applicable wards, since this was not reflected accurately last week. Table request then, pages 13 to 16 for noting. Moving on to the DFP performance against business plan objectives, can I refer you to preparation sheet, page 3 of your table packs, and DFP Q2 performance against business plan targets at pages 18 to 29 of your main packs. Can I welcome the witnesses to the table? Good morning.
Morning, thank you, Chair.
Good back up this morning, I see.
Sorry?
Good back up this morning.
I'm going to speak slowly this morning, Chair, because we have some students who are practicing their minute-taking skills, as I understand it.
Dave, if you're content, we're just going to go straight into questions.
Suits
okay.
Me.
While the Department's performance report provided on the 7th of January covers the period to the end of September 2015, why has an updated report not been provided to cover the third quarter in advance of this meeting?
I think the convention has been, Chair, that we provide you with two reports, a mid-year report and an end-year report. But if the committee would like to get reports on a quarterly basis, I think we could certainly do that. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. So we would routinely only normally have given you 2 reports a year, but as David says, if you would prefer to receive them quarterly on a routine basis, we can certainly arrange that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, in terms of the figures that are in front of us, that are obviously out of date now, I mean, where does the green, amber, and red now stand in terms of those figures?
We've got 21 green, 2 amber green, 6 amber, no red.
We have no red as at the end of quarter 3.
Yes, okay.
Can I just ask as well, during the performance report on the people strategy at last week's meeting, there was some confusion around the definition of the RAG status reports, and obviously you have a green, you have what's called amber green, which is a sort of pukey colour, and you have amber, which is now an orange colour, and you have red. So how do you distinguish clearly between each of the 4 assessments? Because if you look at the RAG assessment, I mean, we've looked at red and amber respectively, and under red, one of the bullet points is where delivery of the targeted outcome is likely to be achieved but with significant delay, and then under amber there's a bullet point where there is significant doubt around the achievement of the target outcomes in the target time frame, which to me sounds like the same thing. So how do we know that you aren't pulling the wool over our eyes and that a lot of the ambers should be actually reds?
Yes. It's a very good question, Chair. We do follow the approach that's taken with the Programme for Government monitoring. And I would have to agree with you. A green is pretty straightforward. You know, the target has been achieved. A red is pretty straightforward. The target isn't going to be achieved or hasn't been achieved. But I have been at many discussions where there has been debate about precisely what amber, green and amber actually means. So rather than get into a sort of semantic discussion, what I'd be happy to do for any of the amber, green or ambers is just to give you a sort of clear explanation as to what has actually happened.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, in terms of the amber, green, do you believe there's a need for that? I mean, you're saying based on what Programme for Government?
It's the approach that's taken by OFM, DFM to the management of the overall Programme for Government.
So there's an onus on you to follow suit, is what you're saying?
We follow suit, yeah.
Okay.
I think really also for efficiency reasons, it's helpful for us to be able to use this report to inform the updates that we do to the programme for government for those targets that are in our business plan that then feed through to the programme for government. If we use the same assessment system, it enables us to feed that smoothly through rather than needing to do a second piece of work to work out what the target update for the programme for government should be.
Okay, well, rather than me going into the detail at this stage, no members of a number of selected areas, so I don't want to overlap those. So start with Leslie.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Morning. The managing expenditure during the year, of course, has been subject to certain difficulties, and it's at an amber status. That's not a light amber or a dark amber, it's just amber. Obviously, the delay in welfare was a big issue there. What is the current situation, or how confident are you that guidelines won't be breached by the year end?
We are confident now. If I take the in-year position, since the Q2 report, obviously we had a November monitoring exercise which was agreed by the Executive. We've also had the Fresh Start Agreement, and as a consequence of those two things, we're confident that the Executive's budget will balance at the end of the year. We also have had agreement to the budget for 16-17. So our 101, again, we would regard that now as a green. In fact, both those are green, both the in-year and the budget for next year.
So there's no risk of exceeding the budget exchange scheme?
No, not at the moment. Well, you can never be sure until the end of the year, but certainly we are pressing departments very hard. On the one hand, to make sure they don't overspend, and I don't think there's any risk of that. But equally, we are pressing departments very hard to make sure that they don't underspend to a level beyond which we would be able to carry forward the monies through the budget exchange scheme. And at the moment, we're as confident as we can be that that will be achieved.
20 million borrowed from the consolidation fund for OFM, that doesn't breach it in any way?
No, that's
back next year.
That 20 million is purely about cash management. You need to distinguish between budget and cash management, and there was no implications as far as OFM DFM's budget was concerned. The issue simply was to do with, as I understand it, excuse me, the transfer of money of financial transaction capital monies to the universities, and OFM DFM is the department through which those monies are transferred, and the 20 million cash was simply to allow that to happen, but there was no budget issue.
Okay, thanks, David. Could it move on then quickly to the OECD case studies, which is an interesting thing. Obviously there's a delay here. What actually is the current situation?
The report was received and has been circulated around departments for fact-checking, and there's quite a number of points have been raised by departments. So those have been sent back to the OECD. The OECD are working through those, and we're hoping, we're hoping to get an updated and corrected report within the next few weeks. So I think the intention had been to have this all completed by the end of March. I think it is liable to take a bit longer than that now.
Right, so it'll go outside the current year.
Yeah, and obviously it's unlikely that we would be able to publish it during the pre-election period, so I think there's a chance that it may not be published now until after the election.
Right, and the last question then on that, obviously it is meant to form part of the sort of scenario for the programme for government.
Yeah.
Is that at risk of going by the wayside now?
No, there is work going on at departmental level to sort of lay the ground out for the next programme for government, and obviously departments have seen what is in the report, so that process, or we will be using the OECD report to inform that thinking anyway, so we're not losing out on that.
Thank you.
Deputy Chair.
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to look at the milestones, 2015-16 milestones for the devolution of corporation tax, which I see has a green status. So if that goes awry, we can't pin it on you. We have to take the blame ourselves. What are the remaining milestones in that, and how are you going to progress on the second round effects issues?
Right. Well, as you know, the goal is to have the powers in place so that a lower rate can be set from 1st of April 2018. There is quite a comprehensive project management plan which sets out all the milestones. I don't have that in front of me today. A significant milestone was achieved I think just after Christmas with the signing of a memorandum of understanding with HMRC and Treasury. Yep. That is allowing us now to develop the ICT systems that will be necessary, and indeed the budget agreed by the Executive before Christmas makes provision of 4.3 million to allow those systems to be developed. Obviously, we're having ongoing engagement in regard to issues in and around, for example, the adjustment to the block grant that will take place. My personal view is I think it unlikely that the Executive would be able to agree that finally until pretty close to 2018. If we look at what's happening in Scotland at the moment, where they still haven't agreed some of the block grant adjustments that will be necessary to allow fiscal changes, which are to take effect from April this year. So there's a lot to play for there, and I think there will need to be political engagement before any final deal is done on that.
Absolutely, and I think members probably are broadly aware of that timeline. I suppose it's specifically how what will be done to address, as I say, what they're calling the second round effects, basically the impact of other on the figures of other tax benefits that will accrue to the Treasury, and how that will be managed and reconciled with the figures that we have here. Well,
the Treasury, the Secretary of State and the Treasury have said before that second round effects is a red line for the Treasury, and that the Executive would not be given the benefit of second round effects. And there's a reference to that in the Stormont House Agreement. That's the 2014 Stormont House Agreement. Now, I suppose what has been agreed can be unagreed, but at the moment, Treasury are absolutely clear that Northern Ireland will not get the benefit of second round effects.
Okay. What engagement has there been with the European Commission, and what sort of scenario planning for the impact of Brexit, if it were to happen, on the devolution of corporation tax?
There's two issues there. We'll deal with the corporation tax point first. There has been quite extensive engagement with the European Commission on the transfer of corporation tax. And at the moment, we've no particular concerns that any impediments will be put in the way by Europe to allow the lower rate to be set from 2018. We obviously have to work through UCREP, and that engagement is working well. So, as I say, and no particular concern. The Brexit issue, I'm glad you asked me that question. There's been no particular. We've had no engagement with Europe on Brexit.
So there isn't any Plan B scenario being outlined for if the UK were to withdraw. You know, it's just, I suppose you would just continue apace, and I suppose it's not for you to sort of look at the impacts on that. So there's no, it's not something that you're factoring into any of your.
Not at the moment. The referendum was only called,
yes, of course,
slightly less than a week ago.
Not unexpectedly, though.
No, indeed. But at the moment, no, we've had no engagement.
Just looking at R110 in the table about rate collection and the aim to collect 1.2 billion net cash receipts and reduce the debt rate by 5%, both of which are reassuringly green-lighted. So how is that going? And particularly looking at the LPS debt rate, what practical steps can be taken to reduce the amount of
I'm happy to report that as of yesterday, I was advised that the target on rate collection for the year has now been met.
Okay.
The targets to reduce debt are on track for achievement, so we are reasonably confident on that. There are quite a range of measures which LPS do take to pursue debt. I don't have the full list, but certainly we can provide you a more detailed briefing on that. But I think the key point is that the overall approach to tackling debt has changed in recent years, and there's much more targeting done now towards those who are more likely to be able to repay, and devising ways in which people who can afford to pay but maybe over a longer period can be allowed to do so. I don't know, Bridget, is there anything more to?
No.
You probably don't have these figures to hand, but is there any? Can you tell me, are we ahead or behind of other regions in the UK or down south? Do we have more debt to pursue? Do we have more avoiders and defaulters and people who can't make those repayments?
I don't
or I
know.
suppose, do we have fewer mechanisms to retrieve it? Yeah.
No, well, we should. The mechanisms available to us shouldn't be that much different from, say, in Great Britain. I'm not quite sure what the arrangements are in the south. Local tax framework is different down there. But there may be some benchmarking done, and I suspect that debt levels will tend to vary to an extent depending on the characteristics of the particular region.
Area, yeah.
And obviously we would have higher levels of disadvantage than, say, the southeast of England.
Yeah.
Our debt levels may be higher. I just don't. We can find that out for you. Sorry.
I think that from memory, colleagues in LPS have told me that actually there is more enforcement power across the water.
Oh, right.
I can't remember exactly the detail, but I think they have a greater ability to maybe seize assets than we would. So there is a greater sort of enforcement right.
Okay.
But I would need colleagues in LPS to.
No worries.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Two more final quick ones. To what extent is that data available for the regionalisation of it? I mean, how specific can you see where those debts are, or where the non-collection is happening in Northern Ireland?
In Northern Ireland?
Yeah. It's there if you want to go to
There's plenty of information.
And you mentioned,
because we know who owes us money.
Yes.
We would know areas where there's a particular problem.
That's sort of more what I meant. And just finally, you said that you've hit the targets for the year, which is great. Will they be more aggressively set for next year then? Can we tighten it even further?
Yes. We normally wouldn't. The Minister wouldn't normally agree a target until probably May or June time, until we see what the outturn is. But I think I'm right, and say Bridget can keep me right here, but certainly over the last 4 or 5 years, the target has become increasingly hard as the years have gone by, and our expectation is that would be the same this year.
Okay.
And that's both for total rate collection and also debt reduction.
Although I suppose we also need to take into account any potential impacts on collection from the results of the voluntary exit scheme. So I don't know whether that will mean that we would be probably less likely to increase it maybe as much as we would have done in previous years. But I mean, that will be a matter obviously for discussion with the
exactly. That's an important point because to a large extent the effectiveness of our debt collection depends on the staff who actually pursue this. And if you have fewer people, obviously the challenge of recovering debt is that much greater.
Okay. Thanks. That's okay.
Martin?
Good morning. Nice to see you again, David, of course. And my apologies for keeping you waiting. I hope the students aren't here to study punctuality. If they were, I would have failed immediately. R112, really to follow on the subject we've just been discussing, the voluntary exit scheme. Wondering just, because it's on target, I think our last briefing we are looking probably at 10,000 people accepting voluntary redundancy over the next period, saving £400 million a year to the to our pay bill. But I just wanted you to reflect on that issue of where the pain is being felt. Are we still able to get the work done? Are there particular pressure points now that people are leaving, and how you feel it's being managed, and how you hope to manage it time ahead?
Well, looking just at the civil service, where we had, say, 27,000 people a couple of years ago, we are on target to achieve what was in the business plan for the VES. And that will mean, I think we've already seen 2,400 people going. There'll be another 400 or so go, so we will lose, I think, 2,800 or so people. That will save us £86 million per annum off the Northern Ireland Civil Service pay bill at a cost of £90 million. So it will pay for itself, in a sense, in 13 months. But when you take in all those who left under the voluntary exit scheme, together with all those who have, with the posts that have been suppressed because we haven't been filling vacancies and we've had a moratorium on recruitment for 2 years, between the 1st of April 2014 and the 31st of March this year, the civil service will have reduced by 17%. Now, to put that in context, Whitehall achieved savings a little higher than that, but over a period of probably 4 or 5 years. So the reduction in numbers has been quite stark. Obviously, everybody hasn't gone as yet, so we're still feeling this. And I think it is quite clear that with the people who went just after Christmas and the anticipation of those who will go at the end of March, and then the last lot will go at the end of May, it is proving very challenging. And I think, as we've explained to the committee before, the voluntary exit scheme was a cost reduction measure, first and foremost. It wasn't targeted, so we didn't have any great control over who was going to go. So you could argue that the areas where the greatest pressure was may not have been the areas, those may have been the areas where we actually lost a disproportionate number of people. So we're having to redeploy people around to actually make sure resource goes where the highest priorities are, and that is proving quite challenging, because you're having to put people into new work, you're having to train them up. Sometimes people maybe don't want to move from the job they're currently doing. So a lot of that has been going on. So far, we have managed to maintain business continuity, I think, across the civil service. I'm not aware of any major failings in service delivery, and I know the head of the civil service agreed with the executive that business continuity would be a clear objective in all of this. But clearly, if you lose 17% of your workforce, there will be difficulties, and I think it'll be over the next year that we actually see that.
And can I ask, just, is that the timeline you're saying that there'll be more leaving the autumn? Is that then finished, or does it go on to 20?
No, as far as the civil service is concerned, the last people to go under the voluntary exit scheme will be at the end of May.
May 2017?
No, May 2016, May this year.
So
now, after that, we will have achieved our cost reduction targets, and what we will then be into is we will probably see the moratorium on recruitment lifted, because obviously as people go after that, then vacancies will have to be filled. I think there's also a sense as well that excuse me, in any workforce, it's unhealthy not to have recruitment over a long period of time. Like I may have said before, in my old department, Detty, when I left, there were no staff under the age of 24. They haven't recruited anybody, so there will be now no staff under the age of 26. And that's not entirely healthy. So we are going to get to a point where we need to sort of just freshen up the workforce.
thank you.
I think that's how you use your phones.
Gordon? Thank you, Chair. Just slightly more detail. You've mentioned this already, but in terms of target number IP101, it's currently amber. Could you give us an update there? The department required to make savings of 25 million, 15, 16?
Yeah, we're on target. We expect to have achieved all those savings. Bridget, do you want to just talk through some of the detail?
Well, So we are on track, we think, to come in under budget in the current financial year.
Okay.
Our focus is obviously trying to make sure that we come in as close to budget as we can. But I mean, I think it's recognised this year with the unusual timing of some of the monitoring rounds. I think we'll probably see a slightly higher underspend in the department this year than maybe I would like.
Okay.
But we continue to try and manage that, and certainly the likelihood of overspending is now very, very slim.
Okay. Obviously, here in the notes it mentions the January monitoring round, and we all know what's happened there. But it also says in terms of the anticipated technical transfers or additional capital funding, which puts this in jeopardy. Do you have any more information?
So, as part of our regular work, we would do a lot of work on behalf of other departments. So particularly, for example, in Properties Division, where there is development required to the office estate, and other departments want that to go ahead, what would usually happen is, because those assets belong to us, we would do the work, but they would provide us with the budget in order to achieve that work. And so in the absence of a monitoring round, that can leave us with a position where we've started work on the promise of money coming from somewhere else, and there's no mechanism then for it to be provided.
Okay, that's fine. The action plan of activity for 15-16, you have some figures in there. 54% of the projects have been achieved, and the other forecast of savings that you have. Do you have any update on that?
We are on target to achieve all the savings that we needed to in order to deliver our budget now. There are some of those projects actually that will probably continue on into the 16-17 year, which fortunately we don't need the savings now to be achieved within the 15-16 year. So it's okay for us that those have just been phased slightly later.
Okay. And then finally, just another amber target. Sorry, it's page 28 on our pack, OP 102, in terms of sickness. This is obviously something that's raised time and time again. The department's overall sickness absence target was 7.6 days. That was obviously missed.
Yeah, I don't think the civil service as a whole is going to achieve its target, which I think is 10.5.
10.2.
10.2. And the department, we're unlikely to achieve our target now. It's unfortunate, but we have put in a range of measures to try and correct this. But I think there's a combination of factors at work here. And the voluntary exit scheme and various other things are clearly having a part as well. 2/3 of our absence is down to long-term sickness, and the vast proportion of that is down to stress and anxiety, and most of which actually isn't work-related stress and anxiety, but that is a big issue for us within the department and across the service.
Okay. And sort of brings you on to the next question, was about trends that you're seeing there. You're obviously talking about long-term sickness. Has that been that's consistent? That's always been the main issue. Are you seeing any differences or any further trends in regards to this?
The trend in sickness in the Northern Ireland Civil Service had been downward up until I think about the last 18 months, 2 years, where it has risen again. And obviously there's a variety of factors at work. But clearly the amount of long-term sickness is the major factor which has impacted on that. And one of the things we're doing now is if somebody goes off sick and the indication is that it is stress or anxiety that is the reason for that, there is earlier intervention. And there's evidence to show that if there's early intervention in a sort of caring and supportive way, then the chances of getting people back to work earlier are much improved. And I think there's also evidence to show that if you can get people suffering from stress or anxiety back to work, it can actually accelerate their own recovery as well.
that was bringing me on to my last question, which you've not
Yeah.
answered, so that's good. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, but just to close, you made reference to the Oecd section. We have a briefing scheduled for the 9th of March.
Yep.
Excuse me, in regard to that there. Will that still go ahead then, or is
Yes, I think it'll be useful to keep it in your diary, keep it in your schedule. I think it's only worth doing if it's going to be meaningful to the committee and its members. So we'll keep that under review and we'll liaise with with your staff on that. But at the moment, I think it's worth leaving that in.
Okay, all right. Thank you all very much again.
Okay, thank you.
We're on to the next briefing, members, on defamation reform. I'm going to refer you to pages 31 to 34 of your main packs.
Sure, I'm going to step out for this one. I publish a number of newspapers, but if it was possible to take NAMA, this is finished. If members would agree, I'd be very grateful to that.
Mr. Chairman, if you have multiple cases for defamation before the court at the moment, sitting in this, as I am, I have a huge number of these at the minute because of the Downpatrick issue, and I don't know whether I should be here or not.
Any advice now?
Grace, and you can agree.
Individual.
I'm really gossipy. Should I go?
I think it's still okay if individual cases are not discussed.
General stay.
Okay. Members content to take the NAMA review then straight after this? Just very conscious of quorum as well. Okay, morning.
Good morning, Chairman.
You want to give us a brief opening statement and then we'll go straight to questions.
Certainly. The brief opening statement is in relation to defamation law. This is a project, as you know, which was taken forward by the Law Commission. The Law Commission moved into a state of suspended animation, and unfortunately that was before the researcher, Dr. Scott, who had been working on the defamation project, had presented his recommendations. The project fell to the Civil Law Reform Division of the Departmental Solicitor's Office, and Laura McPolin is the lead lawyer on that project. Now, we wanted Dr. Scott to finish giving his recommendations, and funding was obtained from the Department of Finance and Personnel in order to do that. Now, Dr. Scott has seen the substantive law and the procedural law in this area as being quite closely linked, and he has wanted to speak to Lord Justice Gillen, who, as you know, is leading the Gillen Review of Civil and Family Justice in the, on the judicial side. That meeting was slated for February, but it's now to take place on the 1st of March. So we're now at the stage where we haven't seen Dr. Scott's report. We don't know what he's going to say, but that should be presented to us very shortly after his meeting with Lord Justice Gillen. In a sense, there has been a hiatus in the development of this project. Under normal circumstances, Dr. Scott would have written his report. That report would have come into the department. The Minister would have considered it. It would then have gone to the Executive with any proposals that the Minister wished to make, and it would have come to the committee, to yourselves, as part of that process. We've had a hiccup where the ball was passed mid-report, but we now hope that when Dr. Scott reports, that that will go to the Minister, and the report will go to yourselves, obviously, as well, together with the comments that people have made to the Law Commission on it, and then the Assembly consideration of the report will proceed in the normal way. We're happy to take any questions the committee may have.
I think it's fair to say that the committee's been waiting on this for a long time. I should add Mike Nesbitt's been waiting for a long time as well. I mean, you said that there's a meeting to take place at the start of March. Can you be any more specific on when the department will receive the report, and if there's any chance that the committee may get this before we break for elections?
Laura?
What I was going to say is Dr. Scott's meeting Lord Justice Gillen to look at the procedural aspect of things, and really what we've been trying to do, Chair, is we've been standing back. We've been wanting this We've been reluctant to intervene for the very reason that, as Claire's already explained, in the normal course of events, the report wouldn't come to us until it was completely finished, and the Law Commission would have controlled its own timetable on that. So in that instance, Dr Scott has set up a meeting with Lord Justice Gillen. We want to give him the space to have that meeting, and then anything coming out of that he can pick up and incorporate within the report, so that it's a more comprehensive and effective report, because I think some of the consultation responses were highlighting procedural aspects of Northern Ireland law that they wanted investigated. So I think it's right and proper that he has the space to do that. But in terms of a hard fast date, he hasn't given a hard fast date, but he did say that shortly thereafter he'll be presenting the report. So, in answer to your question, I can't give you a firm date, but we're certainly hoping that it'll come to us in March.
But so your confidence coming in March then?
Pardon?
It's coming to you in March.
I'm hoping.
Fairly confident.
Oh no, I would never ever say fairly confident, because for that very reason, as I say, I don't want to compromise Dr Scott, and we have been trying to give him the space and the independence, because the last thing we want is for anybody to suggest that there have been any interventions, and it's really important for him to have that space to undertake any inquiries that he needs. And there's also the aspect of getting a proper report. If you put a date on and say we want to buy this, there's always the worry that it will not be as comprehensive as it should be, and you'll end up doing the work at the back end of it. So I think, all things considered, I think that's the right way, and I'm sorry that we can't give you a firm date. We would have loved to have been able to come. I mean, it's some time since we came and spoke to you the last time, and I had hoped that the next time that we came before you would be able to have that debate and discussion, which is how we develop policy, and have the report, because it makes things so much easier for us. Everything's on the table and everybody's having a discussion, and they know what the recommendations are, and it's an informed debate. But we are where we are, and as I say, the difficulties sort of arose in terms of the Commission, and the Commission going into suspended animation, and we've had to pick up the pieces and then try and run with it.
And to what extent then is the review looking at legislation in other jurisdictions to ensure that the recommendations are based on best practice?
Well, my understanding is that Dr Scott has an eye to other jurisdictions, like the Republic of Ireland, etc., and has been looking around. The proposition obviously was, here's the 2013 Act, do you think the 2013 Act is suitable for application in Northern Ireland? But there was also the proviso, should the Act be, are there any aspects of the Act that should be amended or could be improved in terms of the application in Northern Ireland, and that's been under active consideration.
Okay, Deputy Chair.
I'm new to this committee, but I had kept an eye on this, and it's bizarre, really, that the reform hasn't occurred, and it has been beset by the issue around the review and running out of funding, and I think most people just don't understand why it wasn't, the legislative consent motion just didn't go through here. Just some of the picking up on some of the things that the chair was asking, is there any sense that, I mean, the motivation for reform in GB, of course, was the feeling that courts were going to be brought, or were being brought into disrepute, that libel law was kind of a playground for rich people to cover up inconvenient truths and stuff. Is there any sense that is moving over here, or that our courts are being more cluttered up by the gap in the law, the fact that the law hasn't changed here?
We haven't detected any indications in that regard.
Okay.
However, having said that, we're necessarily reliant on figures which really don't tell much. But certainly the last time we looked at it, in terms of the number of figures, the cases that were coming to the High Court and into the county courts, there wasn't a big surge.
Okay, and it's complex, but as I say, there would seem to be quite a lot of support. And I was looking at a survey by the Libel Reform Campaign, and presumably they surveyed people with a relevant interest in it, but 92% did want reform and did want stronger public interest defence. But they have set out a couple of alternative things in the absence of formal reform. One was an alternative dispute resolution through a civil procedure. Is that something that has been considered, or something that's viable?
Well, there already is. The courts already operate a system whereby you have alternative dispute resolution.
Although they're specific. The alternative libel project, is that something that they said could, in the interim, improve the situation that we have here before we get
Well, that would be a matter for the courts rather than for, because there's
No,
that division
yes.
between
Making a comment on it, but yeah.
policy and between policy and operations.
But there is a big drive in the courts now to encourage people to try and resolve their disputes
before they
without
come.
going to court, because I think everybody recognises that it's difficult when people go to court. It's difficult for all of the parties involved. And so, as I said, in all of the spheres in the courts, you see it in the family courts and in the civil courts as well, there's a drive
To set out,
to
yeah,
encourage
the-
people and speak to each other.
Okay, that's all from me.
Okay, John?
Thanks, Chair. And I appreciate this isn't exactly your fault, but we seem to have been grappling with this. We had the chance to do it with a legislative consent motion in 2012, 2013, when the law was changed in the rest of the country. We had another opportunity with Mike Nesbitt's private members bill, which effectively the executive managed to scupper by saying, "Oh no, we're doing this." So then Mike wasn't able to get access to drafting facilities in here, in the Assembly. And we're still looking at this policy 3 years after it's come into, the law has changed in the rest of the UK, and we're no further. Well, we're going to have a report, but there's no guarantee that we're not going to be on Easter recess or indeed dissolved the time we see it in this term. So there's absolutely no chance of any movement, even generally a discussion round. So it's deeply disappointing that it's taking us so long even to develop a policy. And regardless of what the report says, if the report does come out in favour of changing the law here, we are then into drafting new legislation and changing that, when we could have quite easily have done it with Mike Nesbitt's bill, and we could have had all of that committee scrutiny and public consultation during that. I think Mike actually had a fairly significant consultation back in 2014 or whenever that had happened. I just find that incredibly frustrating that we're still at the stage of waiting on a meeting to happen next Tuesday and to hear feedback from that.
I share your frustrations, and I think everybody does, because we're all anxious to see what the recommendations will be. I'm really interested in the topic, and I'm interested to see what the recommendations will be. I think there's 2 points out of what you said. First of all, in relation to Mike Nesbitt. Mike Nesbitt was incredibly generous. Mike Nesbitt undertook a consultation, had spoken to people about the bill, and then realised that the Law Commission was looking at the area and rightly recognised that it was a big area of law, and it was appropriate for that area of law to be subject to proper scrutiny and investigation by an independent body. And he engaged with that, and you're absolutely right. He stepped back from his own opportunity to promote legislation, recognising that the greater good would be to allow the independent body to look at it, come up with recommendations, and then whatever is put in place at the end is hopefully tailored and suitable for the purposes that it was intended. The second aspect is the delay. If I can just say, sometimes people will always talk about delay, and I don't want delay, but sometimes delay can be a good thing. And in this instance, I think in the couple of years since the legislation in England and Wales has come into operation, we've had the opportunity, because the last time we came and spoke to the committee, there was an impression given that you legislate, it changes everybody's view, and it makes the world right again and gets the balance between free speech and the right to privacy. And at that stage, I don't know if you remember or not, I said, well, look, when you legislate, it's words. Lawyers are always used to interpreting words, and there's no guarantee that how you intended something to operate is how it will operate in practice. And inevitably, in all of the provisions that are within the 2013 Act, they're open to interpretation. So in the period since the legislation's been enacted and in operation, there have been really relevant developments that Dr. Scott will be able to take on board in terms of. Big one is the whole hurdle about serious harm. What constitutes serious harm? How do you handle it? At what point do you assess the serious harm? What about if somebody apologises? What impact does that have? Really interesting cases like Cook. And then also cases about a big one, which was the motivation for, part of the motivation for the reform in England and Wales, was this view that people were forum shopping and they were going to England because they were getting an easy deal on the libel front. Well, there's also been a case on the provision in relation to which is the most appropriate court to hear the libel action. So it's not great consolation, but I think it's some consolation that that period between when Mike brought forward his proposals and when we were going to get the report, it hasn't been lost. And I do hope and fully anticipate, and I know I'll not be disappointed in this, that Dr. Scott's report will be all the richer for having access to that case law.
Thanks, Chair, and appreciate the answer. I just hope we can take it up with Mike while he feels his generosity has been overextended on this one. Round the delay, we often hear this about delay. I think we heard through our legal complaints bill that, well, you know, we were at a report in 07. Well, actually, it's a good thing because we've learned some of the things along the way. It's just frustrating that everything here seems to take so long, and it did certainly. We've got the impression I've got from DFP is that they really have been brought to this point, nearly kicking and screaming that they didn't want to ever touch this. I mean, I think it was Sammy Wilson didn't want to go down the road at the time of the LCM, and then the bill changed some of that. I just hope that when this report comes, there is a serious attempt to change it, because I've had this issue raised, Chair, with me at probably you think quite an unlikely event, an Invest NI event, around companies being concerned about coming to Northern Ireland, investing in Northern Ireland, and because of our libel laws, and because of the issues that has raised. And that thing should concern us all. If it's proving difficult to attract investment into South Down, into Northern Ireland, that's a major problem for us. If companies are nervous about coming over here.
Well, that point obviously was raised, you know, during the discussion, and also by the libel reform campaign. A point has been made, but you know, we expected, if all things had been equal, we'd have had the report in our hands in June of last year, and we'd be well advanced in terms of critically assessing the recommendations and hopefully making policy recommendations. But I'm not ducking out. The reality is we are where we are, and we have to make the best of it. But as I say, I do think that the report that we get from Dr. Scott will be well targeted, and that Northern Ireland will benefit from that. And can stand over the fact. And the other aspect of it is, you know, can answer the question, well, we're not blindly following England and Wales. There's an evidential base for any action, any agreed actions that will be taken. So, you know, if we've got an evidential basis for the action, I think that it underpins the law and makes it the potential for it to be more effective.
Well, just one very quick question, Chair, and I'm grateful for your replies. Is, Ron, you don't have the worry about assembly elections. So, what do you see as a realistic time frame to develop some policy ideas? If you get the report in the next few weeks, what do you see as a time frame of looking at this and assessing what policy and if legislative change in Northern Ireland is desirable?
I'm putting my hand to my face because I'm conscious of the number of things that I've dealt with over the last number of weeks, and where you went in and you were saying, I'm going to deal with A today, and then there was B, C, D that came in that were urgent, you know, different pieces of legislation that we've been dealing with. But we'd like to sort of, you know, have a 6-month period to look and assess the recommendations, and then determine what policy recommendations will be made. And thereafter, it'll follow the usual course. If legislation is to be introduced, you'll have a draft. You've agreed with the executive. A draft bill will go out to consultation, and then thereafter, once you've gone through the consultation, then that's when you're making firm legislative proposals. So it's difficult at this stage, but I would say it wouldn't be any less than a year before you'd be looking at.
I mean, we're really at the point now that we would be at where, if we still had a law commission, the law commission report came in to the department. Mm-hmm. But from our point of view, that gives us an evidence base. from which we can develop policy options for a minister. When the minister comes in and gives us a steer, then the legislative process starts. So, we're ready and willing to run with legislation once the executive gives us a direction. The thing that we'll all need to bear in mind in the next assembly is resource, and there will have to be priorities will have to be chosen between bills, and if this is a bill that the assembly wants to prioritise, then we'll prioritise it and run with it.
The executive and direction is not always two words you hear together. Thank you.
Okay, members? Okay, thank you all very much. Looking forward to the report coming out in March.
Thank you.
Okay, members, can I advise members of the committee when I move into closed session for the next agenda item in line with normal protocol for considering draft committee reports?
Now in the Assembly Committee Room 30.
Okay, committee will now consider 3 proposals for SL1s and 1 SR. First one, SL1, Form of Government Accounts Designation of Bodies Order NI 2016. Pages 36 to 40 of the main pack, subject to negative resolution. The purpose of the draft order is to enable DFP to request information from those departments and bodies designated in the schedule to the order, and to pass the information provided to Treasury for use in the preparation of the whole of government accounts. This is an annual exercise, and there have been some updates since last year, reflecting changes to the Education Board structure and local government structure. I can inform members that Joanne Warnock from DFP is in the public gallery to answer any questions that might arise in the course of the consideration of this L1. Members have any questions or points to raise? Content?
Yes.
Okay, but the question of the committee is consider DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation under SL1, the whole of government accounts designation of bodies order NI 2016, and has no objection to policy implications of proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed. Superannuation certification officer for NI order NI 2016, subject to negative resolution. Purpose of the draft order is to make pension provision in the Principal Civil Service Pension Scheme NI for employment in the office of the certification officer for NI. Can I inform members that Peter Phillips from DFP is in the public gallery to answer questions that might arise? Do members have any questions?
Is this an existing staff post? Just wondering, Chair, why therefore pension wasn't resolved at that time?
Well, it's an application process. So we received a notification from Department of Employment and Learning last year that they sought to make pension provision for the certification officer, so their current post holder. And they've gone through due process in terms of this just completes the process in terms of enabling them to join our pension arrangements.
It wasn't part of their employment?
No, so they haven't been a member of our scheme up until now, but these arrangements enable them, should they so wish, to join our pension schemes.
And they do. Okay, Chair.
Okay. Okay, members. Put the question: the committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation under the Superannuation Certificate Officer for NI Order 2016, and has no objection to the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed?
Agreed.
If you just stay there a wee second, you're up for the next one too. Public Service Pension Certification Officer for NI Regs NI 2016, negative resolution. Pages 48 to 52 of the main pack. Any further questions on this one? Not enough, is it? Okay. Put the question: the committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation under the Public Service Pension Certification Officer for NI Regulations NI 2016 as no objection to policy implications of proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, Peter, you're free to go.
Thank you.
Thanks. The Rate Small Business Hereditament Relief Amendment Regs NI 2016 has been laid in the Business Office for formal consideration, subject to negative resolution. Inform members that at the meeting on 20th of January, the committee considered the initial proposal for support legislation and were content. The Department has confirmed there is no changes to the overall policy, and the examiner of statutory rules has no points about the rule by way of technical scrutiny. Members content. Put the question that the committee has considered SR, the rates small business relief amendment regulations NI 2016 has no objection to the rule. Agreed. Okay, LCM Stormont Agreement Implementation Plan Bill. I remind members that last week's meeting the committee considered this LCM and agreed to write to the Department seeking an urgent response to the specific issues relevant to DFP. This would in turn inform any committee response to the OFM-DFM committee. OFM-DFM committee has now sent formal correspondence to the committee, which can be found at page 67 of your main packs, and there's a web link to the LCM as well as the relevant extracts of the LCM, which are at pages 69 to 70 of your main packs, and DFP has not provided a response to the committee.
It's just very tight turnaround time, Chair, because the request was only made last week, and then the OFM-DFM committee, which is scrutinising the LCM, needs the response from this committee for its meeting next week, so it's extremely tight. But it's essentially around, the provision is essentially around it's outlined there on page 70 of the main pack. This is the provision that's in the Stormont House Agreement, Fresh Start Agreement, in terms of the Assembly not exceeding the block grant in terms of any annual budget. And the provisions that have been included in that regard. And that's included within the LCM, so it adds an additional functions to the Finance Minister in terms of bringing statements to the floor ahead of budgets to ensure that the block grant provision isn't exceeded. So it's just really in the absence of a response, if the committee's content enough to, once the response comes in from DFP, to send it on to OFM-DFM committee, just explaining that the timetable didn't allow for any real scrutiny of the issue because of the LCM process, Chair.
Members content? Okay, moving on then to correspondence.
Just a couple of items of correspondence, Chair. First of all, from last week's meeting, there was correspondence come in from DFP in response to Assembly research papers on the 16-17 draft budget and answering various scrutiny points. But afterwards, I was just thinking it might have been useful to send that out to the other statutory committees as well in terms of their legacy reports. They may have issues that they may wish to highlight. So, if members are content, just to circulate that correspondence to the other committees.
Good.
Then there's correspondence at page 94 to 95 of the main pack from the Community Foundation, NI, in relation to, it's in follow-up to the session that the committee had last week on dormant accounts, and the Community Foundation NI is basically outlining its role in terms of social finance, social investment, and its work with the charity bank and the cooperative alternatives. So this is at pages page 94, 95 of the main pack, and it's asking for the opportunity to brief the committee on its work, and it's particularly vis-a-vis the potential use of dormant accounts funding in that area. So it's just really to check if members are content to, or to wish to schedule a briefing. There's a slot on the 16th, the last meeting, if members are interested in that issue, Chair.
Members content? Okay.
Then members would just take a quick look at this correspondence at page 21 of table paper. It's from Professor Lester Manley, who has a consultancy business in Dundonald, and it's 21 of table paper, and he's explaining that the business experienced a major issue in terms of a computer server crash in September 2013, which led to significant damage to his core business. His workforce being made redundant largely, and it led to an insurance claim which hasn't been satisfactorily resolved, which has led to I suppose an appeal to the Financial Ombudsman Service complaint in that regard, and he's just outlining the difficulties he's been experiencing in relation to the Financial Ombudsman Service, and asking if appropriate, could the committee assist in some way. So we just look back on previous cases like this, Chair, and just in terms of context, insurance and the Financial Ombudsman Service isn't reserved, as a reserve matter is non-devolved, and the committee doesn't normally get involved in individual cases. However, there were a few precedents in terms of specific cases where the committee has raised issues, and there was one in terms of the Financial Ombudsman Service in particular in the past where it came back with quite a lot of information in response to the committee. So it's really just to take members' views on whether they wish to act in some way in relation to this, and one approach might be to, subject to Professor Manley's agreement, to write to the FOS asking for the complaint to be expedited, and appropriate involvement from Manley, the consultancy business, Chair, if members are content enough in that regards.
Well, I spoke to Lester Manley about this case and suggested he write to the committee. It's very complex, and it seems to me to go to the core of it is that his belief that the Financial Ombudsman is too distant from the consumer here, and that he didn't get the hearing that he deserved. So I would be content if we would write to the Financial Ombudsman and maybe raise the issue for him and see if that is helpful in getting perhaps the type of attention that he believes the case merits and that didn't get.
Great.
He's talking about Adam William.
All the correspondence, I think, requiring decisions.
Okay, forward work programme, page 97 of the pack. Members content to work. It's updated to reflect any decisions made today and published on committee web pages. Agreed. Also, can we add in derelict land tax briefing? This is something that we raised previously with Brian McClure. Members content to try and slot that in for the 16th. Agreed. Any other business?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if all of us have received a deluge of emails from charity shops. It looks like every charity shop in South Down's been on to me, and there's a joint email going about representing 14 very high-profile established charities, from Action Cancer to the Hospice. Clearly, they're extremely worried even by a partial implementation of rates being charged on charity shops. I must say, I initially had heard this is just a vague proposal by nurses. Happened. Where are we with that? Is that anything more than that, or is there actually a proposal out there to charge rates on charity shops?
Well, it was one of the considerations of the consultation that the Department carried out. So it is in the Minister's desk in terms of...
So it's a realistic proposal that could happen.
It's under consideration.
Yeah. I think maybe we should take it a wee bit more seriously than I originally thought, because I must say the emails that I've received from those charities are very cogent and make some very valid points. And it's only when you start to look, you realise how many units in any town centre in the province are occupied by these shops. And I have no idea the scale of the fundraising that they generate for cancer or children's charities, etc. So it is a big issue. Is there anything more that we should be doing about this?
We can pass on a briefing.
From the charities or from DFP?
Well, this group you're saying represents...
This group, apart from St Vincent de Paul, this group seems to represent all the major charities on the high street of Ireland, so they have got themselves into a coherent group. Maybe ad hoc, but putting forward a very reasonable view in I mean, it's only when I read their submission that I realised there's much more to this than it seems, and it could have profound implications for our high streets if this goes ahead.
I'm happy to support Jim that I've met with some of those involved.
I think, Chair, it's a good point, and certainly there's no real change of emphasis, but I think from my recollection of the last briefing we got, situations now developed where major charity shops are on the high street trading against a furniture shop, for example. In my own town, there's a charity that sells furniture. They actually sell it. And there's a retailer right beside them. He's paying the full rate. The bit that would concern me a wee bit, that certainly I think needs to be looked at more carefully, is that the landlord situation. Can't let their big shops on the high street be therefore liable to a portion of the rates, and it's an easy way out for them to pass it to a charity shop. And this is, I think, where the AFP was coming from what I can remember, along those lines, that there's an attempt to avoid paying rates here by the landlord, which would be better, of course, than what the charity shop pay nothing. Some suggestion that 20%, I think, was a figure, again from memory, in other places that were levied in cases like that.
So I think in GB, the local councils have the power to
You have to make up that 20%.
the 20%. If it's helpful, Chair, Mr. Wells sends me the details.
No.
I'll try and schedule a briefing for the 16th, and DFP will be up that day potentially anyway, so they could maybe respond.
Very helpful.
But in addition to that, I mean, you mentioned St Vincent de Paul as well. I know they've been on to me, so perhaps we should
I just wonder why they were not part of the group, because everybody else seemed to be there. And SVP is a very big player in the charity shop, certainly in my constituency. Could I just say, at Leslie's point, my understanding is the charity shop sells new product. It actually is rated in that part of the shop, and that's something I didn't know until I got the briefing, to avoid this issue. But if they're entirely second-hand bric-a-brac, then it's not real.
It's not practical. Mixed quite often in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't prove it.
But that's it, or it's Christmas cards and it's tiny wee.
Yeah, but they're obviously new, you know.
Chair, a panel briefing including SVP and then DFP afterwards.
Sorry, yeah, the same issue, and it is worrying about the displacement of furniture shops or bookshops, and also the fact that there is certainly in and around the Lisburn Road, there's issues. Startups find it hard to get into a premises, and a landlord is much less likely to take a risk on somebody on a 6-month lease than they are in a charity shop. But I've just left after working for a charity for 10 years, and they will lynch me if we change the policy on this. But at the same time, I would be.
Well, let's consider all options.
I know. Get careful what you wish for. Is there any figure on how much we're talking, like what the rating implication would be if how much this would raise at either 100% or 20%?
There was a figure in the consultation paper.
Was there? I didn't. Yeah, that's what I haven't come
Raised
across.
this issue actually in question time last week. I get some detail on the minister.
Right. Okay. I'll do that.
I
Okay.
can't give specific figures though, but
Do you know what I mean? If you're talking $500,000, then we'll let it go. But if it's a very major,
It says a lot more than that.
Yeah.
I remember. Yeah.
yeah.
80 million in my head for some reason. Would that be what it was?
Well, of course, that simply will come off the bottom line of money then put into cancer services or children's charities or whatever. So, somebody will then have to take up that slack. So I don't actually see the logic of this. And secondly, if you took the if you took the charity shops out of some of our towns, what have you got left in terms of empty shops generating nothing?
That's 2 age, Jim.
I think anyway,
Could make a bad
it's worthy
situation
of having a
too.
discussion.
Okay. Next meeting then will be Wednesday, 2nd of March at 10 a.m. in room 30.
Committee room 30.